places you grow up, tumbling round this road.
This is
Your Other Family Podcast.
Welcome, fam, to episode 2 of Your Other Family Podcast. We are a ministry integrating faith, sexuality, and gender together. My name is Tom. I'm the executive director of Your Other Family, director of Your Other Brothers, and here with me, as always, going back 2 episodes, it's my other sister, director of Your Other Sisters, Erin. What's up, Erin?
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
It's going so well, Erin. I'm so excited. Are you excited?
I am. Also, I feel like that's our catchphrase because we've said that exact thing in that exact way a couple times.
Oh, I didn't even know.
What's up, Erin? Hey, Tom. How's it going? You know.
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, there is
like
a cadence.
Now. Mm-hmm.
There's a cadence. There's a rhythm to this. Yeah.
And then you say it's going so well, and it just makes me happy.
It's going so well. Yeah. No, it is going so well. We're back for episode 2 of this new show that we're putting together, Your Other Family Podcast, or the YOFcast, as they're saying on the streets. And we're really excited because today we're bringing on not just one, because we could bring on one author. That would be a great conversation. But let's bring on 2. Let's bring on 2 authors and have an even better conversation. Yeah. So really excited. You know, we got Mark Yarhouse and Julia Sadusky, co-authors of Emerging Sexual Identities, navigating the landscape with today's youth. I had to look at the subtitle. We're gonna talk about this book. We've both read it. We actually featured it on our YOF book club last month. So we had a good book club community discussion about it, and now we get to talk to the authors. Like, how cool is that?
Good for a little follow-up. Be cool to listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so excited. Erin, I think I might have told you this. Maybe I didn't, but my connection, I don't really have much of a connection with Julia Sadusky, a connection as far as like a place in space and time. But like Mark Yarhouse, this is going to be such a humble brag. So like, I got invited to speak at the North Star conference back in 2018, which I always affectionately call Mormon Revoice, hashtag Mormon Revoice. But it's like a side B centric sort of ministry in the LDS church. And Mark Yarhouse was like the keynote speaker that year. And they invited me to come and speak as not a keynote, like not on the big stage, but I had a breakout room and I had a little presentation, 2 presentations actually that I did on brotherhood and on vulnerability. And so that's my connection to Mark Yarhouse. Which I don't think I'll bring that up in the episode discussion that we have with him, but I just wanted to say that for our listeners that I have this connection with Mark Yarhouse. Also at that conference, David Archuleta performed.
Oh. Man. Wow. What a moment in time.
2018. So this was pre-David Archuleta coming out. He was very sweet. He was so encouraging to everyone in attendance. Like he said some words before he played a few songs.
He was such a good ally.
He's on a different journey now, but also just a really sweet young man. So we're grateful to David Archuleta. There's my blast from the past, 2018. What a moment in time.
Whoa.
2018, what a year. What were you doing with your life in 2018, Sister Erin?
Oh my God. Going along with the Mormon thing. This is the second time Mormons have come up.
It has, yeah. We're developing themes and inside jokes and running tracks for our show. It's happening. Culture is happening.
Love a motif. Love a callback. So in 2018, for most of the year, I was living in Cambodia. And that was actually around the time where I had the first inkling that I might not be straight.
Whoa.
So while you were giving these breakout sessions, guys, Tom is not new to this. He's true to this. He's been in the game for a long time. I was chopping vegetables in my kitchen in Cambodia, and I was like, am I straight? And then I didn't think about it again for like 3 years. Yeah.
Wow. Love that. Thanks for that little glimpse into your story.
Sure.
You know, with every subsequent episode, we'll peel back layers. We'll get more parts of the story for you and for me. Well, I'm excited for this episode because Erin, you know, Mark and Julia's publicist reached out to me months ago and asked if we'd be willing to receive a complimentary copy of this book. And I was just going to be bold and daring and be like, I could just accept the one copy because I'll gladly take anyone wants to send me a free book. Please send me a free book if you're listening. But at the time, you know, we were just getting you on board with payroll and getting you in this position that you're in with director of Your Other Sisters. And so I was bold and daring and I asked Lydia, the publicist, hey, could we have two actually? We have 2 employees and I think she would love to read this too. And so she was sweet enough to send us not just 1, but 2 complimentary advanced books. Like, do you feel legit? Do you feel legit like me?
I feel humbled and honored to be number 2. Thank you, Lydia. Love you, girl.
Shout out to Lydia. Mm-hmm.
Lydia is the sponsor of this episode.
Yes. Oh yeah, I didn't even think about getting a sponsor, but yes, Lydia can be the sponsor.
Lydia, yes.
She's been lovely to interact with, like getting this conversation scheduled, this podcast. So yeah, I'm just so excited for this conversation with Mark and Julia.
Yeah. We also heard from Julia Sadusky at this past Revoice in July. She was a keynote speaker.
That's right. And you and I we got invited to this pre-conference dinner, and she was at the table like at 5:00 from us, I think. I think she was like right behind us to the corner. Yeah. So I can like visualize that she was in the room with us. So I guess that's my other like connection point, you know, is like we were a table away.
And then I think Mark Yarhouse was also there. So that there's my connection, I guess. But
okay. Was he in the room too?
The Side Beat conference with him 8 years ago. But yeah, he was there, I think. But
cool.
This poor notebook. That's another thing I was doing in 2018. I was writing in this notebook.
No way. That same one?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Erin, how many notebooks do you have? How many physical, tangible books of notes do you own?
I don't want to count. Yeah, there's a lot. Like, I love stationery and stuff. Like, I still have notebooks that I haven't used yet that I bought in Thailand. Because I don't know. I just don't want to use them. And then that's it. It's my memory of Thailand.
Aww. Mark Yarhouse has entered the waiting room. Should we let him in, or should we wait until Julia signs on? Or should we wait a minute?
Yeah.
Build some rapport. All right. So I'll start it off and then at the beginning, I'll just ask for y'all to introduce yourselves however you want to. Or I could ask Julia to introduce Mark and Mark to introduce Julia.
Oh, I'll say she's always late and I'm always early.
Maybe that'll be the intro. Like I'm here now along with Erin. I'm here with Julia Sadusky and Mark Yarhouse. What's up, y'all?
Good to be with you all.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be here.
Before we get into our conversation, which Erin and I are so excited, we've taken lots of notes. Erin has physical notebooks. I have virtual notebooks. And so we've got lots of notebooks to go to today. For those that don't know who you are, do you guys want to just briefly introduce yourselves?
So I'm Mark Yarhouse. I'm a professor of psychology at Wheaton College, where I direct the Sexual and Gender Identity Institute.
And I'm Julia Sadusky. I'm a licensed psychologist in Colorado, and I have a private practice here. I also travel a bit to speak and train around sexuality and gender, and have written books with Mark in this area.
Very nice. And I love that we're able to do all of it, because I would have loved to talk with just one of you, but the fact that we can have both of you, I've never done an interview on a podcast with multiple authors of the same book. So this is really exciting for me personally. I know for Erin as well. It's fun to have multiple time zones represented. So I appreciate, the coordination effort to have this conversation.
Here we go.
Here we go. As an author myself, and as someone who kind of geeks out about writing books and I'm genuinely curious, before we actually start talking about the book that you co-authored, Emerging Sexual Identities, I just want to know the process. Like, what is it like to co-author a book? Because this is not your first rodeo together. I know you all have written previously. Like what does that process look like? If you don't mind just sharing, like how does a co-authored book come together like this?
That's an interesting question. Julie and I, so this book is kind of a companion book to a book we wrote called Emerging Gender Identities. And I think at that time, gender was, as it still is, very, it's really central in the cultural discourse around norms and non-normative expressions of identity. So there was a lot of interest in that kind of an idea. And Julie and I had been working together for many years and done clinical practice and teaching and trainings. And I think we wanted to sort of account for trends in what we were seeing in our clinical practice, really, what people were seeing in ministry settings. And then, so we often share ideas like an outline. I'm not great at like outlining a book. It's hard for me to kind of imagine it until it's kind of coming together. I think Julie is stronger at being able to pull together an outline and follow it. So we kind of share those ideas. We did the same thing with Emerging Sexual Identities and kind of what were we seeing. I think there were a couple of things that we wanted to make sure we covered, like we'll talk about later, but like this idea of a looping effect we introduced in Emerging Gender Identities. And then we were wondering, how does it fit with Emerging Sexual Identities? And we saw some differences. And then we talked about engaging like queer theory. We talk about this new taxonomy of like residual language and identity and dominant and emergent, which mapped on really well to emerging sexual identities. And then we wanted to talk about queer theory, and then we got into like, how does all this work out in ministry? And I think that's between the two of us. I mean, both of us really have a heart for the church, really have a heart for equipping people in those spaces, and just think about the teens and young adults that we've known in ministry spaces. And so I think those chapters, I think, are half the book at least, and it's thinking creatively about what ministry could look like. And I think we both long for ministries to really be healthy and helpful, and all the things that sometimes they seem to be struggling with, so.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think, we often joke that books write themselves, because they do really flow from things that we're sharing, not only with each other, but with the communities that we're talking to or the clients that we meet with all the time. And so it's really an extension of that. And I think because we've worked together for so long, there is a way in which, as we're writing a book, we kind of know, okay, you could say something here, or I have something I want to share here. And that, I think, helps with the flow when you're writing as a co-author, as we kind of do know a little bit of what we each have to say, and that ends up flowing really nicely in what we actually write.
Yeah. You have my curiosity peak, because I haven't read the previous book, Emerging Gender Identities. So I'm definitely going to be checking that out now, because I was curious what that relationship was between the two books. So I'm just excited. I thought y'all did an awesome job with this. Like it's really like illuminating to know, like, I think I'm young, and then I read a book like this and I'm like, oh, I'm not as young as I used to be. Like, I'm in my late 30s now, and it doesn't seem like that much of a difference, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but there's some significant differences happening. And so we're going to talk about that. I think what would be a great way to lay the groundwork for this conversation is just to kind of start, putting some language out there. I love, and we actually had a book club with your book last month in our men's community. So we got to discuss your book with our men's community about a month ago. And I think it was like across the board, none of us had ever heard this language before of residual, dominant, and emergent language or taxonomies, ways to describe sexual orientation. So I would love, to just kind of start diving into what do those three terms mean: residual, dominant, and emergent. And and I'll just like pose it. I don't know if like if I should ask Julia this or if I should ask Mark this. So I'll just let y'all figure out who answers what or follows up after who.
Go for it, Mark.
What's really funny is that we don't get to do podcasts together very often, and both of us answer these questions all the time by ourselves. So when we're together, it's like, okay, who goes when?
It's like a challenge. Yeah.
But like whenever we teach together, like we do compliment each other. So I might say something and then Julia will swoop in with thickening the plot, or she'll jump into something and I'll come in later. So anyway, so what do the terms mean? Okay. So I can't take credit for this. I came across these ideas by an author named Rob Cover, and I was, researching for a book on emerging sexual identities. And he had presented this taxonomy, just laying out residual, dominant, emergent, and emergent mapped on really well with what we were already conceptualizing as emerging. So let me just lay it out this way. So residual refers to the way people used to talk about something. And so it still has influence in a society, but it's waning. And so around sexuality, and especially non-normative sexualities, language like sin or vice or abnormality, there's religious concepts there, and there's also psychiatric medical concepts there. And so historically, those were more dominant in society. And, some Christians will say, well, we still use that term in our church. And it's not to say it's not significant where many people are, but in terms of the overall scope of society, it's waning in its influence in many segments. And so what's dominant? Well, dominant language would be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, kind of the terms that most people use to describe diverse sexual and gender identities. But then emergent is sort of kind of on the horizon. What is being curated and explored and embodied, particularly by younger people. And so emergent language gets into a more granular look at both sexual and gender identity. But when someone says they're like greysexual or demisexual or on the ace spectrum even, and that's ace spectrum is actually a lot of the words that we talk about as emerging. They're using what Rob Cover described as micro-minoritized identities, kind of very granular look that it's almost like the dominant language doesn't capture the nuances that are part of my experience. And so rather than fall through the cracks, I'm going to name that and I'm going to explore those, maybe even try those on for a while. Versus I think dominant was very kind of established, and it was fought for. In terms of the gay rights movement, it was established as an identity. The idea of it being innate, the idea of it being immutable, like these were really important research topics that shaped how people thought about different issues. Emergent does not rely on that way to think about things. It doesn't worry about innate. It doesn't worry about immutable. It's like, I'm going to try this on. I'm going to see how this fits. And I can explore that and embody that and come back. And so it's a different experience, which maps on a little bit better to queer theory, I think, than the other had.
That's right. And that's where we were really trying to help people understand why, right? We speak past each other in these conversations. Why is it that a parent who maybe has a family member who's gay or lesbian or bisexual, in trying to approach their young person, they're hearing very different ways of making sense of this experience. Somebody's not saying, I was born this way. They're saying, well, I don't know if I was born this way, but what I'll tell you is this language makes sense to me. And this is the word I'm going to try for a while. And mom and dad, who cares? I'll change it if it's not right. Well, that's a very different way of processing your sexual orientation than many parents and people in ministry were experiencing. And so just trying to use language and categories to really help people wrap their mind around those differences over time.
While you guys were talking, I was just thinking about how same-sex attraction has gone the reverse way, like especially in Side B communities. Like same-sex attraction would have been emergent potentially on Zynga back when Tom and his guys were anonymously posting on Zynga in 2000.
The good old days, early 2010s. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would have been emergent, but then it's slowly in the last 2 decades, it's become it's like already become residual in a lot of side B conversations, but still dominant in certain churches that may adopt a side B position because they're serving a lot of people that would use residual, but it's kind of like a bridge between the two.
Exactly. And that's something we talk about in the book is how do you use language as a bridge, knowing where different communities are as far as, is this residual in one community, maybe more broadly? And that's really how we framed it. What's residual in the broader culture, but what's dominant in our church community? And how does that play out differently generationally? And then how do we use these categories to kind of meet one another in the middle, as opposed to alienating the other and not being able to move towards better conversation here?
Yeah, I think, and Tom, I think you would agree with this, but I always think of, especially when I'm chatting with other side B folks, is I'd rather be understood I'd rather be heard than understood. And I'm flexible in my language depending on who I'm talking to, like you both mentioned, or one of you mentioned in the book. I don't know which one. Just using flexible language in a way that, for me, it doesn't feel alienating and it doesn't feel like I'm not being true to myself, but it's more so like I'm acknowledging who I'm speaking to. And that doesn't really, as a person who is not in adolescence and as a person who has integrated my faith and sexuality and still continue to do that, it's not something that I feel like I have to try on or put on to be accepted necessarily. It's more so like I'm trying to convey a message. And yeah.
I'm glad that you brought up, Erin, the same-sex attraction SSA identifier, because I've had a journey of like, that's like the only language I would have used to self-identify back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, middle 2010s. And then that's like, as side B became a more and more a part of the nomenclature, it was like, okay, I guess I'm gay now. I've never used that word, but I guess that's what everyone's using. And it like doesn't feel completely correct. It's kind of like trying on a new like oversized jacket. It's like the sleeves are like way out here. It's like it's like mostly correct, but it's not. It doesn't really feel like it's saying everything I want it to, or it has these connotations I don't like. And then it's only been in the last few years I've been processing my own sexuality and like feeling like you guys mentioned the ACE spectrum. Like I'm somewhere on that ACE spectrum, and like looking specifically at some of these terms, I'm like, oh my gosh, like the sweater is starting to fit a little better. Like it doesn't feel as clunky, doesn't feel as oversized. And I love this like quote. There's like a testimonial. You had so many testimonials in the book, which I appreciated, from real people. But someone said this: having a word meant that maybe I wasn't so messed up after all. Like this sense of just like, I just want to feel normal, and I just want to know that there's other people like me, and that there's a place I can belong, that I'm not like too different or weird or messed up. Like I love that language of messed up. I use that phrase in the subtitle of my memoir. And so that's often how I've felt in life, because I'm attracted to men, but not necessarily sexually. And it's kind of this weird, confusing thing. And so I appreciate, just right at the beginning of your book, you put a glossary of all these terms, which I was familiar with most of them, but there was some that was like, I have never seen that word before. And so I imagine there's probably people older than me are not as familiar with this world, that you could read this book and get introduced to a lot of terms that are becoming more popular today. So I appreciated that glossary at the front, and just giving awareness to the concept of a spectrum, and like people sliding along a spectrum instead of fitting neatly into a big giant box, I think was a big takeaway from the first part of the book for me.
Yeah, that was a challenge too. One of the challenges of print publication is, do you list over 100 sexual identities and define them, or do you say,
right,
go to the Trevor Project? They're the ones who just, had reported on this. But we just wanted to put a few out there so the reader would realize what we're talking about. Like, these are terms you're not that familiar with, without overwhelming people. Because I think when you do ministry training or parent training or equipping, and parents see the scope of what's out there, it is overwhelming, especially generationally. It just feels like I did not grow up with these terms. I have no idea what we're talking about right now. And it's, I don't want people to either roll their eyes and be dismissive, or just kind of feel like the wave crested over their heads and they're just being knocked over either. We want them to feel like empowered to step into this space.
Continuing on with like language. Language is so interesting to me because I was an English major and I love writing. I love stories. I love words. And so like there was a brief section at the beginning of the book called a brief history or a history of heterosexuality, which I found really fascinating because like, I don't know if anyone out there listening knows this, but this word has not just always existed. Like all words have to be coined or invented or someone has to start using them at some point. Like they don't just always exist. So I'd love to just like dive into that a little bit, the section about heterosexuality, and then we'll kind of dive more into queer theory and talk about that too.
Yeah, it was interesting. Even when we were researching it, like there was things that I didn't know either. Like I didn't know that it had been used differently by different people, and it sort of had some growing pains as a word. It wasn't like automatically this is this ideal word for a normative experience. It was like, nope, different people thought of the term meant different things. They'd use it in different contexts, and it would only later, sort of as the public sort of gravitated towards it as explaining something, that kind of ended up taking on the idea today of a enduring attraction to the opposite sex. That's kind of how we think of it as an orientation. But part of the history is that, people were engaging in sexual behavior and with the opposite sex, all the things that people do today, who have that more common experience, but they just wouldn't have had a sense of identity around it. They would have been a man or a woman, they would have been in a relationship, but they wouldn't have had the identity first kind of way of thinking about themselves. Just wasn't happening. Like historically, it wasn't happening. Then there wasn't a term for it. So it was actually in the idea of, there are a lot of things going on at the same time. Some of them were legal around civic codes that were being developed in Great Britain. And so the idea of like, what kinds of behaviors should we be concerned about is unnatural. And so just when you get to unnatural, you have to say, well, what's natural? And then you have to kind of land on what term, there was a term that wasn't originally meant to convey this, but it was close. And so it was, used over here. And then it meant different things in different contexts. Is natural procreative? Is unnatural not procreative? Like there were those conversations going on. What are we going to say is legal consequences for behavior? So there were legal issues. There were other issues, moral issues, scientific categorization. All these things were going on. It seems almost in an overlapping way. And then I think ultimately people were drawn to it as a concept of enduring orientation. It was interesting to me too that some of the proponents of it were also proponents of not thinking of homosexual as a non-normative experience, just a different category. But of course, that would not be followed historically. It would be viewed as a aberration. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we just didn't want the reader to think that the only thing you have to account for is homosexuality. You also have to account for heterosexuality. And when you say, well, your experience is just related to a social construct. Well, okay, but heterosexuality is a social construct as well. So it's not, I didn't want people to like weaponize one against the other. And usually the people who are the subject of the weapon are the people in the minority. I think that would have been a mistake. And we just didn't want that to happen here.
That type of lens kind of creates the opportunity for parents and youth leaders to have empathy for their youth, or even, people that are our age. Tom, we're both millennials. I'm a younger millennial. I imagine when I was reading the book, I imagined maybe one of you talking to a concerned parent or a concerned youth leader, because what you guys do in the book so well is just, and the Bible does this too, like it iterates similar comforting themes at the same time while also introducing more sociological concepts. The different narratives, the different ways in which to get points across, so that a parent who might be more logically inclined, or a parent that might be more inclined to gravitate towards like an emotional like a storytelling type of perspective could gather something from the book. So I really appreciate that. Also, I studied sociology, and I studied a lot of social science, sociology, history. And so I was just eating it up the whole time. I just really appreciate a lot of the references also to how these terms have kind of shown up in other minority groups as well. So
Erin's in her element.
I am.
Great.
I'm already a queer person. I studied sociology, so I'm like, yes. And I work with youth, and I work with college kids. So Tom also works with youth, younger people than I.
I know. I haven't had these types of conversations at the youth group where I volunteer at my church, but it's like, I'm definitely going to be sharing this book with my youth pastor, and just like, I've already been a resource of sorts for him, but I think this is an awesome one to just kind of be up to speed a little bit on what's happening in the culture. The phrase queer theory, like that's been a really like polarizing one in conservative circles. It's like, certain college courses, or I don't know, it's been weaponized. This is like a not good thing. And what I appreciate about your book is like just taking a fair approach about like pointing out like what has it done. And so I'd love to just hear, like, for those that don't know what queer theory is, or if they think they know what it is, or they don't really know a lot about it. I'd love to talk about it from a secular perspective, and then also specifically like a Christian queer theory, or however you would say that, to get a little more specific from within. But yeah, what is queer theory, if you were going to explain it or just kind of set it up for some folks?
So queer theory comes out of a number of different movements and academic developments, but I think most people would see Foucault as one of the originators of queer theory. So we're in the 20th century, and we're kind of looking at a way of deconstructing norms and ultimately viewing sexuality as socially situated and constructed in culture. And so if something can be constructed, it can be deconstructed. And so the norms around sexuality are usually established and reinforced by people in power. So the idea would be you have to dismantle those structures, those sources of power. So you can think of like, well, who teaches norms around sexuality? Well, the church does, or those civil codes I talked about earlier, like those were created. So those were written. People did that. Well, how do we explain non-normative experiences? Okay, well, we realize there's power differences here, and we deconstruct and we problematize those cultural assumptions about what's normative sexuality. And so that as a movement happened in like philosophy and literature, in the academy, gender studies, feminism, feminist movement, elements of that, and then AIDS activism. There were a lot of different social forces and academic forces that went into play. So it's also been a part of our field, psychology. It's been a very strong dialogue partner in that space. And there's been genuine disagreements within the gay community between queer theorists and maybe mainstream LGBTQ community. If you think of one of the most impactful developments in LGBTQ history in Western society, in the US, it would be gay marriage, right? And that is viewed as an assimilationist strategy. You assimilate with dominant culture by looking at what's important as a norm in culture, marriage between a man and a woman. Well, if you can have gay marriage, you're using a strategy that allows you to assimilate within the mainstream of society by saying, look, marriage is for us too. Well, queer theorists would look at that and say, no, marriage is a construct developed by people in power to say, here are the people who are normative and right and living correctly, and here are people who are non-normative and aberration, and we keep them down. They're not allowed in that category of people in society. So queer theorists would say, don't assimilate with the norms. The norms are the things that are keeping you oppressed. You need to be who you are as a sexual being. And so push back against those sources of authority. So even within that conversation, it wasn't just like maybe, the mainstream gay community was for gay marriage and maybe social conservatives were against that. There were disagreements within the gay community. And I don't want to make too much out of that. It's just, so it's good for the listener to realize that the gay community is really broad. There's a lot of diverse opinions within the community, even though we'll talk about it as kind of a monolith. It's really not that. It's quite diverse. And queer theory is one point of disagreement. And it's been challenging, I think, at times in that conversation.
And the sense that I was getting in meeting with teens, especially, is they knew a lot about queer theory. And the only thing that parents tended to know about queer theory, or ministers tended to know about queer theory, was queer theory equals bad, or kind of at odds with Christianity. And so we do try to model in the book a way of engaging with queer theory that's a bit less reactive, that's kind of honoring what are the reasons queer theory kind of came to significance. What is the felt value of it to members of the mainstream LGBT community? How is that trickling down into the sense of understanding of sexuality in young people? And then how do you actually have a conversation with a real person who's drawn to queer theory as a Christian? And so that whole section is really trying to unpack that exact thing. How do we engage with it in a way that's less reactive and hostile than maybe we see modeled in some of the common conversations about it today?
Yeah, and I just love bringing like Christianity into it too. I love the pull from David Bennett, the quote about queering the queer. Essentially, it's like how does the side B movement, like how does that fit into this conversation about queer theory? I love that word that you used too, Julia. Engage, like engaging with this instead of just reacting to it. Yeah, that's good.
You know, we had David Bennett here to campus about the same time we were working on this, and
fun.
I heard him firsthand. He had finished his dissertation. He was presenting the concepts in a more accessible way. So, and I think what he really wanted to do was say that side B, celibate gay Christians are the ultimate queer experience in reaction to the queer community. If there's an assumption that to be authentic is to be this sexual being with a telos of, self-fulfillment and satisfying kind of who you are as a sexual being in a manner of after Foucault, here's a group of people who see their telos as centered on the kingdom of heaven. And they're saying, it's so radical. It's such a radical experience for me that I queer the very assumptions that you have about what it means for me to be authentic in my sexual being. And so he really kind of just takes all of it and turns it around and says, you want queer? Do you want queer? Side B is queer. Boom. He just moves it over here. And it was just a fascinating conversation.
It's like queerception. I've never seeing that phrase, queer the queer, that will stick with me for a long time. I just really appreciate it. So shout out to David Bennett. Future guest on the show. That's my hope. So you mentioned briefly, Mark, the looping effect. I wanted to briefly mention this of just like, how do words form or how do identities come together? Like you listed out these five components, and particularly with this upcoming generation, the kids, the quote unquote kids these days, like I would really love to get into like how identities are forming with regard to those 5 parts of the looping effect. So could you lay that out for folks that aren't familiar with that phrase, the looping effect? I know you mentioned it in the previous book, you said.
Yeah, so we came across this. This is from a philosopher named Ian Hacking, who passed away just a few years ago. He's a Canadian philosopher, and he had been involved in demography where you count people and you classify people. And what he discovered was that when you classify people, people respond to how they're being classified. And he wanted to sort of do kind of a thought experiment with that, with a number of different phenomenon, whether it's like we used to call Asperger's disorder, or whether it was homosexuality. He actually took those 2 examples, a couple other examples, and he described this looping. And you can, in a sense, start with classifying. You classify people. And so as you designate them, if you designate a chemical compound, it doesn't interact with how it's being classified. But if you classify a person or a group of people, they know they're being classified and they'll respond to their classification. And so there was a time when the classification was homosexuality, right? Well, people we call gay today knew they were being classified a certain way, and they didn't care for the classification, right? It was pathologizing. It had the psychiatric medical undertones. There's all this, there's pieces to it, and moral connotations as well. So you have classification as the first, and then you have the people who are being classified and how they interact individually and as a group with that classification. And then you have the institutions that study and listen to those people, whether it's, an institute like I run or, different people in medical, psychiatric, ministry settings, whatever, but people are listening to those people. And then you have what becomes conjectural knowledge, or sort of the taken for granted realities, what's being talked about on Jimmy Kimmel and what's being talked about late night and, on The View and things like that. Okay. And you have that kind of experience. And then you have the experts who get to determine what counts as real knowledge about something. So the example that we had given that's probably the most well-known for like homosexuality, homosexuals, and then you have the people interacting with that, you have the people listening to them, and then you move to conjectural knowledge. Well, there was a point where the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the diagnostic manual of mental disorders. And so there was a group of people really advocating for themselves, saying, we're not mentally ill the way you have characterized us. And so that advocacy leads to the removal. And so you have experts kind of weighing in, saying, this is, we've weighed the evidence, or we've thought about this, and this is what counts as true knowledge about this group of people. Then you have the rise of a gay identity as kind of the gay movement, the LGBTQ community kind of arising as a culture in Western society. And that changes the classification, right? And so that's kind of probably his original thoughts, I think, about the looping effect, even applying it to this topic. I think it's the only time he really did. And then in our first book, we applied it to emerging gender identities. And in this book, we applied it to emerging sexual identities.
Yeah. And so what I found fascinating is here in the last, whatever it's been, decade or so, with the rise of social media, I found that really interesting, that it's almost like kids these days, they're bypassing the experts. Is that a way that you would say it? It's like social media is becoming who your peers, the people that you find on social media, those are the people that are the experts, essentially. Is that sort of correct? Because I just noticed I'm on TikTok and I'm on Instagram and I'm following it. The algorithm connects you to your people. Erin has a coming out journey from TikTok, right, Erin? Erin determined who she was from TikTok, from the algorithm, which I'm sure is not an uncommon story these days for people to figure out words that they would use for themselves because of what other people like them are using.
I think I hear from teenagers, they'll say something like, I don't need somebody else to tell me who I am. That would be a very common way of talking about this. Or I didn't realize that there was a category or a word to use to talk about what it feels like to be me and be attracted or not be attracted until I heard that TikTok video, right? That gave me language for something that I didn't know about before. And that's been so helpful for me. And then we also talk in the book about people who feel it's on some level overwhelmed by the expanse of that and feeling like maybe they have to perform some of this online and be vetted online. So it's not the expert vetting them, but maybe it's their peers kind of gauging, are you really aromantic? Really? Because what about this? Or what? And so again, there can be benefits in that, and also kind of challenges for young people in trying to explore identity in a forum that we might say is less embodied and yet kind of relational in its own right and in its own way.
I think people who are drawn to emergent language they're not waiting for psychiatry to weigh in on their mental health the way that the gay community really wanted to throw off the felt maybe oppression of psychiatry saying you were mentally ill. They wanted to sort of so they needed the experts to weigh in and say, you are no longer the way we conceptualized you, right? And those who are engaging in more emergent language are standing on the shoulders of the dominant, and they're benefiting from the strides that were there, but they're not doing the exact same thing, waiting for experts to weigh in. They're just saying, yeah, I'm on digital and social media. I'm co-curating my experience of this. I'm trying things on. That's very different, I think, than a generation ago. And that's why there's just such a different experience of language and an embodied reality and co-curation and things like that.
Co-curation. I like that. I like that term. That seems like it fits really well. It's kind of hard to explain audibly. So for anyone watching online, I'll put this clip up there. But I really love this diagram that y'all have about holding faith and sexuality. All these different boxes within boxes, boxes next to boxes. One box says faith, one box says sexuality. And so you have some that are side by side that are touching and some that aren't touching. And one box encloses another. Like, I don't know, to the best of your ability, how would you explain all of that? Like, how are people holding faith and sexuality to bring it back to faith?
Well, let me set this up a little bit. So this is work we've collaborated with a couple other colleagues, Steve Stratton and Janet Dean at Asbury Theological Seminary, and we've been working with them for many years. There's been a line of research of gay Christians who are, especially at Christian colleges and universities around the country, and we've asked them about kind of how they hold these aspects of themselves. And the original analysis of that kind of likened it to kind of, a freshman coming on campus with moving into their residence hall with boxes of light clothing and books and things like that to go to college. And so the idea is you're kind of walking on campus, holding your sexuality and holding your faith. And that some people end up finding a way to bring them together in a meaningful relationship that we would call like integrated. Some people reject one or the other. They feel like they have to reject their faith to be true to their sexuality or deny their sexuality to be authentic in their faith. So the rejection is one of those ways people do it. Other people, it's compartmentalized. These are two boxes that will never relate to each other. So they hold them almost at arm's length. I don't know how to bring them together. It's not something I know how to do. And I think those people tend to fare the worst in terms of mental health and well-being. They're the ones who often are asking for help or ministry help or counseling help. And then other people find a way to relate them. They're not integrated, but they're kind of relating. Like maybe they choose to go to a church because of the fact that they're gay. They go to this church or they go to this, but they're kind of relating them, but they're not quite integrated. And then the integrated might be, I set my sexuality within the box of my faith. The faith creates a border around it in some meaningful way, or I do the opposite. I place my faith within the boundaries of my sexuality, and my experience of my sexuality creates the walls and the boundaries around it. So that's kind of what it means, and we really do mean for it to be a ministry resource. Like I think about that when I'm sitting with somebody, and I know they're on a journey. And I know Julia does this work all the time.
Yeah, and you can kind of see in people, even in just the willingness in therapy or in ministry to talk about, in a faith context, for instance, to talk about sexuality at all. If that feels totally off limits, there is a way in which somebody's holding those as far apart as possible. And we find that people in ministry, and certainly in our work in counseling, even just naming that these coexist for people and that people are trying to figure out, is there a way for these kinds of parts of my experience to be in relationship? Just acknowledging that and giving that analogy for people opens up possibilities to start to imagine, how can I hold these different experiences? And there's something empowering about that for young people too, to say, oh, I get to think about and navigate. And it's not you as my therapist or you as my minister telling me, here's how I need you to hold this today for me to be able to step into this conversation. But I'm acknowledging you are already holding these things. And over time, as we talk, you get to discern, how do I want to kind of walk through the world with these experiences?
That's something I really appreciate. I think there's a note in your section about identifying a ministry model. I guess I'm harping on the parent perspective again, but it's one of the blocks that says, for parents, stay present, invite conversations. And what you were just speaking to was in a way to try to integrate sexuality and faith would be to encourage a relationship with God. And for those who haven't read the book, it says teens can be encouraged to bring their experiences, emotions, and attractions before God in prayer. perhaps coming to a better understanding of his love for them in the midst of these experiences. And just like you were saying, Julia, and what you were both saying in the book, it gives an opportunity for parents to have a ministry and to actually show a way for teens to be both. And then if parents or youth leaders are, I don't know, they feel alienated or they feel confused about different terms, and teens come to them to try to have conversation, and they're met with confusion or they're met with accusations, they'll probably shut down and not bring their other questions, especially about faith, to their parents, as it is another very vulnerable area for people.
Right. And I think many parents and many young people too kind of simultaneously feel like there's not maybe a path forward to integrate these aspects of experience. And so if the people in ministry or who are parenting don't see a path forward where these can come together in a sustainable way, and the young person also is asking that question, it's a foregone conclusion where people end up in that, to your point, of shutting down or withdrawing. And so, yeah, so kind of holding out the conviction that these can come together for people in all kinds of meaningful ways. And that upholding that relationship with Christ is kind of informing and infusing in that process is a big piece of what we're offering in the book.
I love it. The word integrate is one of my favorite words. It's actually in our tagline for our ministry of Your Other Family, integrating faith, sexuality, and gender together. And we had this really great conversation with our book club when we were talking about this, because someone commented, there are people in our community that are all over this page. We have people at the top, like the one at the very top doesn't even have multiple boxes. It's just one box, faith and sexuality. Instead of like them being separate, they're like intertwined, I guess, in an hard to describe sort of way. But I really love this quote from somebody in the book. You gathered their testimony, their experience, and they said, it's out of my sexual development and my sexual understanding that I pursue intimacy with God. But it's also out of intimacy with God that I learned to be better to better understand and integrate my sexuality. So I know there are some people that those things are so intertwined, and then other people that they're very compartmentalized. And so you did a great job. I was nervous asking that. I was like, how can we like verbalize that? Because the visual, it's a cool visual to look at. So I encourage people to check out the diagram in the book, because I think that helps for visual learners. I think that's probably helpful to start to how do you hold both of these things, faith and sexuality, together. And you made a comment in the book too, that Christians often take a little while for this to develop. And Erin even did an episode with Your Other Sisters podcast. Like maybe women in particular take a little while. You did an episode, Erin, about quote unquote late bloomers, people who just have taken a while to piece sexuality together with a faith identity. So if anyone out there is like in their late 20s or late 30s and you feel like you're behind, like I think it seems like from what y'all researched, it seems like they're actually right on time. So there's no shame there.
That's right.
Well, I guess to wind down the conversation, it's like, I put it in my notes, like, now what? Now what for ministry? Because after reading this book, one of my main takeaways, as someone leading a ministry, I'm a millennial, Erin's a millennial. Pretty much there's a couple exceptions. Most of the people that started this ministry with me back in 2015, when we were just a men's community, were millennials. And we were the thing at the time. We were the young people. And I've had this sad realization over the last few years, like, oh, I'm not like on the bottom of the totem pole anymore. Like I'm aging up. And what was really interesting to me was like, as I'm like looking at analytics and looking at our membership in our community, like we're about 50% millennials in our Your Other Brothers, Your Other Sisters community. Maybe 10 or 15% would identify as Gen Z. And so they are a significant minority. I'm pretty sure we have more like Gen Xers and Boomers compared to Gen Zers. And so like this book gave me a lot to think about as far as like, what words do I even use when I'm writing a blog post or when we're putting podcasts together or any of the marketing or any of the advertising for our ministry. Like what if the language I used to been using, isn't cutting it anymore, or isn't what's gravitating toward younger people, or like, do I need to create a ministry account for TikTok or Reels because that's what more kids are using rather than reading blogs or listening to podcasts? Like, so I'm thinking about four-dimensional ways, new ways that I can reach, or that we can reach younger generations. And so I'm curious. Yeah. I don't know if there's a question in that, but that I just wanted to share. That's like things I've been processing since I read this book, was like, how do we reach younger people?
Something that's coming to mind as you're sharing that is just how much we've witnessed that fear shapes ministry approaches, and these fear-based approaches that really sabotage our ability to think creatively about how to show up in ministry and in relationships with real people. And so the thing that strikes me, Tom, about what you're saying is, as you start to get your bearings of, okay, what is the language and what are we talking about when we talk about queer theory and the looping effect and all of that, is it naturally gives way to curiosity about where do we go from here? And in each ministry's particular focus, asking the question, what are adjustments that I want to make to account for people that maybe aren't in the room and I want in the room? And certainly language or kind of venues for sharing what you're doing is one way to think about that. But I just appreciate how much we're hoping that a book like this reduces fear and anxiety so that people can start to think creatively about what is my avenue in ministry, who am I trying to reach, and what adjustments do I have to make now that I have this information in my hands and I'm not as overwhelmed by some of the landscape.
Yeah, I had this humbling realization. Erin and I were talking a little bit about it before y'all came on, but like we did this podcast series a couple summers ago about sexual identity and all the diverse ways we identify in this community. So like we did an episode about SSA, and we did an episode about gay and about gay Christian, but not gay, or gay, but not gay Christian, and bisexuality. And I was like, wow, we are so diverse, like y'all. I was like so proud of myself at the time. And then reading this book, I'm like, oh man, we weren't even like scratching the surface. Like there are so many like greysexual and scoliosexual and all these other terms like there. So that is like on my mind, like for the future of like, man, it probably would be cool to revisit a series like that and do episodes that are way more specific. If kids are like, I say kids, but if like 20 somethings or teenagers for that matter, but if they're Googling certain terms and they want to find resources and stories about it, like they're probably not finding it in our ministry as of now, but maybe in the future. Mm-hmm. Do you have any other thoughts about that, Erin?
Yeah, I did have another question for both of you. And that was, what ignited this interest in focusing on sexual and gender minorities in your research?
Like originally, like back in the day?
Yep, back in the day.
Wow. Okay. Well, for me, it goes back to graduate school. I was asked by the department chair at the time to be his research assistant, and it was such an honor to be asked. I just said yes without knowing what we were going to do. And I go to the first meeting, and he had 3 lines of research, but one of them was on sexual orientation, and he was more of I would say defender of orthodoxy, and which in our views were compatible and we worked together well. But at the time, he was seeing a lot of mainline denominations splitting or nearly splitting at the time around these issues, and a lot of sexuality committees were being formed, and they were citing science, and they were drawing moral conclusions, and he wanted to look at the science and then look at the moral conclusions. And I worked with him on that because I had a philosophy background. I was studying psychology with him. So we worked together for about 4 years or so. And then when I graduated, I looked around and there just were no Christians in psychology in this area. And the Christians outside of psychology didn't seem to be familiar with the research I'd been studying with him. So I sort of viewed it, I held it loosely and I prayed about it and felt more like it was almost a stewardship question. Like I needed to be a good steward of all that had been poured into me when there was so little out there. So I go to the American Psychological Association that August after I graduate. I'm a new assistant professor, just kind of making my way in the world. And I go to this session and there's 2 gay psychologists who say to the audience, "We're failing our people." So they're assuming the audience is all gay psychologists. "We're failing our people," by which they meant we're failing to meet needs for spirituality and religion. So people leave the gay community and they go into Christian ministries that harm them. And I just was really taken aback. I'd never thought I'd hear a gay psychologist think that he had more in common with a gay Christian by virtue of being gay than I would by virtue of being a Christian. And I started to think, are those ministries harmful to people? And why have I never heard a pastor say something similar? Like, we've failed our people. We've failed to meet needs for identity and needs for community. And so people leave the church and they go to the gay community to find those needs and meet those needs. And we're failing our people. But there was never that sense of solidarity from the church, like our people. And I think this would deeply shape the trajectory of my research, because I ended up studying identity formation and how people make meaning of their attractions and how faith plays into that. And even, the most recent things like these boxes and all that stuff is a fruit of that kind of line of research of how people make sense of it and integrate it or don't and all that stuff. So that's kind of how I got into it. And I admittedly, when I started, this was more of an academic question, and I was pretty dispassionate about it. I think that's a word that's been used to describe my temperament around those early on. But I would say today, having worked with so many people, not just as clients and families, but also students and colleagues and people who collaborate with me, like, I deeply care about this community today. And I'm very emotionally, responsive to the topics and the people who represent the topics today. But I think that being a little bit more dispassionate early on in my career helped me a lot, because it helped me to be calm when, as an evangelical Christian, I was being attacked, and people would think I would go to a conference and just bring my Bible, and, I was trying to do research. And so in psychology, that is the currency, is research. You have to do research and have clinical cases to have a place at the table. And when you do that and you try to do it with integrity, you'll get a hearing. And that's really what we were going for.
And for me, I would say, I'm a millennial as well. And I was kind of coming up at a time when, Exodus was at play. And I had people who I loved and were close to me who were pursuing change of orientation. And I was raised Catholic and kind of really steeped in theological formation around sexuality. And so I was getting questions from people I loved about, how does sexuality fit with faith? And for a person whose experiences attraction to people of the same sex, is there a path forward in faith? And does that require change of orientation? And so even as a young college student, I was kind of wondering, why is it that my whole life I was raised in the faith and nobody ever helped me answer those questions until they were very practical and right in front of me? So that really led me in my own kind of personal research and undergrad to find Mark Yarhouse's work. And that was really eye-opening for me to say, oh my gosh, there are people of faith who are actually trying to figure out what is the journey like for sexual minorities in the church. And so that brought me to Regent to study under Mark. And it was really right when I started there that Mark, you had come out with Understanding Gender Dysphoria. And so I was starting to do youth ministry at the time, was getting questions around gender. And I remember at the time saying in a Q&A, in a talk I gave at a youth group, I know nothing about gender dysphoria. I literally said that. And, very quickly that changed as Mark was my supervisor in the clinic. And I was meeting with a lot of families who were asking questions around gender and faith. And, God just expanded my heart. I think for the needs of people with those experiences in our faith communities, I was seeing such deficiency in how we were showing up for families. And doing youth ministry as well at the time just gave me a real heart for trying to figure out how do we translate what we're learning in psychology about this in languages that people of faith can understand.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. I love the combination of your heart, your professionalism as well. Like, it just comes across so clearly in a book like this. So I really am excited to read your previous work. I think that'll be right up our alley as a community and as a ministry. Closing thing I'll say is, like, I love to sum it all up, youth are more focused on relationships than arguments. I think that's something that's becoming so obvious today. And then the whole concept, curiosity is what builds relationships. Listening well isn't sinful or compromising on truth. I just think Christians aren't curious enough. That's my hot take. I just feel like, I know in my own life, I'm not going to play holier than thou. I'm not curious enough. I need to listen more without judgment and just, be willing to be curious without thinking that I'm like giving someone permission to do this or say this or act this way or what have you. So, so I hope that was big takeaways for me in this book. And I hope that people who read it will take away that as well. I appreciate each of you so much for doing this, for taking the time to chat with us. How can people find you if they want to find you in this universe?
Julia's all over the social media. I dabble in a little bit. I'm on X, I'm on Instagram. Yeah. So you can find me at Dr. Yarhouse, and we have an Institute webpage on, on Facebook or, whatever, but, and just on the web, but those are ways you can find me.
Yeah, and the easiest way to follow along with my work is my website is juliasadusky.com, and people can join other forms of social media, Instagram, doing a little bit more on Substack these days. And so, ways to kind of try to bring some of this content to more people is something I know Mark and I are both interested in doing. So those are a couple of ways to keep in touch.
Very nice. Well, it was lovely to chat with each of you. Hope to meet face to face at some point too. Would be so great.
Welcome.
So Erin, we just talked to, can you believe it? The doctors, Mark Yarhouse and Julia Sadusky. I felt guilty. I don't know if you felt this. I felt guilty after introducing them and not using their doctor title, because I've always just assumed that if you work that hard to get your doctorate, like you've earned it. You've earned someone calling you doctor on a podcast. And I did not do that. So apologies if you're still listening, Doctors Yarhouse and Sadusky.
They are doctors. You can trust them.
Yeah. I mean, is it sad to say that it's like there are some quote unquote Christian authors or Christian experts that like don't do the research? They just like, I don't know, like it's just refreshing to, this is what I was like trying to get at the end. Is like, it's refreshing to have these two Jesus followers who have doctor in their title, not just the doctor in their name, but then also like did clearly put in a ton of effort, work into research and putting a book like this together. Like that's so refreshing to me that Christians don't have to just, I don't know, be dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that there's probably a more eloquent way of saying it.
Not to be dumb.
Yeah.
Like multiple times, the whole book of Proverbs. Yeah, and man, they've been writing together for like 10 years. I was doing my research, and they did their first article together in 2017. So it's just so cool to see where they're at now, like writing wise, and I guess as a team of allies for us, because honestly, this work is something that I don't have the energy for. Like I have the energy for personal one-on-one conversations, but I'm not about to be online having these debates or
no way. Yeah.
I'm just exhausted from that. Which I really appreciate. Something about our community is that we focus on people's stories. Although my mind is very numbers, very research oriented, I feel that I'm also people and community story oriented as well. So I'm glad that's not the water that I'm surrounded in all the time, though I love to reap the benefits of others and their hard work in this area.
Yeah. There was an example in the book that we didn't get time to talk about, but just looking over my notes, like they have this really great example as far as like to use a very present day example, like the war in Ukraine. There was a time like a decade ago, certainly 2 or 3 decades ago, you could go to Eastern Ukraine in particular and speak not only Ukrainian, but Russian. And that would be a sign of, oh, you actually care about the people here, because you're learning not only the primary language, but the secondary language or the tertiary language as well. And it just shows that demonstrates if you can speak both languages to the people in that part of the world, that part of the country, that you have this investment, that you're meeting them on their turf, you're meeting them on where they are, versus today, the year 2026, speaking Russian in Ukrainian doesn't have the same context. It doesn't have the same like sense of belonging and the same sense of someone wanting to get to know you, to be a part of your culture. It's now like a different connotation if you speak Russian within a Ukrainian border in a Ukrainian context. So like that to me was such a present example of adapting language as the culture changes, as context changes, to be in front of that and to recognize when are words furthering the gospel and when are they not furthering the gospel. And honestly, like I was telling them, like I'm thinking a lot now about the words that we use in this community. Honestly, I've already started to make some adjustments. I'll give myself some credit. There used to be a time where I would just use the acronym of SSA or gay, and that was it. Like those were the only two words we were really using on our site. So you look back through our blog posts and podcasts the last few years, you might notice queer popping up more. Obviously, we did that identity series on the podcast where we talked about bisexuality a couple of times and pansexuality and other types of sexuality. So like, I think we've been gradually diversifying our language, but not to the degree that I think warrants like where the culture is today with teens and 20 somethings in America today or in the world today. So it really does give me a lot of just curiosity, like how what words will we be putting on our website, or words will we be speaking 50 years from now? Let's be bold. 50 years from now, are we going to be using the same exact words we're using or that we were using 10 years ago? I doubt it. There's probably going to be some changing that's happening. So are we going to run with that change or run against it? I don't know. I'm really curious to,
and will the church keep up?
That goes.
I mean, they're not really doing that.
Will the church
but I have hope
keep up
regardless. And I think I have hope that the kids are going to be all right. Regardless of not being in school for the first like couple of years of their lives because of COVID or whatever. But you're all right.
I was like, when doctors Yarhouse and Sadusky were here, I was like, I don't have a chummy enough relationship with them that I can't just ask them this straight up. But now that they're gone and you're here, I can just say, like, I was like, our churches, and particularly, I mean, I'm going to call out boomers, but it's everybody. It's, it could be younger people for that matter. But anyone who has just like a generally conservative, hates to change type of mindset with these types of things, like if they can't even like make the shift from homosexual to gay or LGBT, like if they can't even make that switch, like are they just doomed? Like that was kind of my question. I was like, are they, like if they can't even make that switch, they're not going to be saying greysexual and scoliosexual and demisexual. Like so are they just doomed? Is there any hope at all for those churches as institutions or for those individual members if they can't even make that jump from residual to dominant, let alone from dominant to emergent? And I don't know. I'd like to think there's hope for everyone, but that feels like such a leap to take from if you're stuck in residual taxonomy to make it all the way to emerging with some of these new terms that are coming up. Like that is a leap for a lot of people to make.
Huge. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the churches, correlation, not causation, churches that may not be able to make that leap might also be of older populations, like you said, and then may stick to their in group, and then may end up being one of the churches that are dying and dwindling in population. I think part of that, like churches need growth, and part of that is some sort of acceptance of contemporary times. Maybe not necessarily emergent identities, because a lot of these mega churches and a lot of the churches that are experiencing growth may not be using those, but in some way they are adapting in a way that would invite younger people.
Yeah. I wrote this down thinking it was a clever, funny line, but then I chickened out and I didn't want to say it in front of them. Do you want to hear what it was?
Yeah.
So when we were talking about language and like how basically all words are invented, like somebody had to start saying that name or that word, and then it became a thing. The more people said it, I was going to say something like basically 3 decades ago, there was no Tesla. Like what was a Tesla? People didn't know what a Tesla was, or like Chicken Crunchwrap Supreme. That was not a thing 30 years
Living
ago.
in this lifetime. Baja Blast.
Yeah. Like someone had to discover or become conscious of, sentient of a Baja Blast in order for that to be named.
Amen.
To
I'm
become a
glad that is a dominant identity. Taco Bell.
Dominant
It's not an
taxonomy.
emergent. It's not like the new item at Taco Bell, but it's dominant. It's here to stay now for a while. Hopefully forever.
Does that make the McRib residual? Is the McRib residual?
Ooh, this would be
Gone back
fun.
a while.
Okay, McDonald's project or products. Yeah, I think maybe because it kind of like comes and goes at certain times in different scenarios. So like residual, yeah. Dominant, Big Mac for sure. Big Mac. Emergent. Oh, they have the snack wrap back. Oh, yeah, because like queer used to be an insult when we were kids, and now it's come back, back and better than ever. It's been reclaimed. Yeah,
there's all kinds of things to reclaim in the fast food world. This is a fun spin-off discussion. Our community can take it and run with it now. We set you up. Now you can go further. We set you up so you can run. And then the last thing I was going to say in my notes was something I appreciated about queer theory that I didn't get to say on the show. I mean, I sort of said a little bit about it when we were talking about asexuality and being on the ace spectrum. I just love the language of spectrum. Like it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like it's not a binary. There's choices or there's like gradients. And like same thing with a spectrum of attraction, because I think a lot of Christians, and I probably would have put myself in that a decade ago, is like sexual and romantic attraction like are combined. Like that's all together. And what they talked about a little bit in the book was a spectrum of attraction. Like there could be platonic attraction for non-romantic closeness with somebody, like with a good friend. There could be an aesthetic attraction for an appreciation of beauty, either physical beauty, intellectual beauty, any kind of beauty. And then there's, particularly in the Your Other Brothers community, we've written a thing or two about this, but sensual, not sexual, but sensual attraction, which could lead to tactile closeness I like that phrase, tactile closeness. So like long hugs or cuddling on a couch or what have you. Like the fact that there are these other kinds of attractions that I didn't have language for, when I was piecing all this together 2 decades ago. So I appreciate the spectrum there. That you might fall on some part of all of that, in addition to, or maybe in place of, romantic and sexual attraction, which are also present in our community, certainly. But there are all these other kinds of attractions as well. So appreciated the shout out, the nod to just the concept of a spectrum.
Absolutely.
That's helpful.
When I use identity language, my preferred term would be pansexual. And yeah, I love that. When I get pushback and when I share that with people, I really just kind of emphasize that it's just a name as a result of a pattern of something that's observable. I appreciate it. Language changes, terms pop up because, I don't know, people are noticing patterns.
It's my hope, Erin. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's my hope that your other family, your other brothers, your other sisters, your other family, that we will be instrumental in like coining a term or coining a phrase or coining a new word that wasn't ever used before, or maybe it was slightly used, but we made fetch happen. Like that's what I want us to do.
So bad.
I want us to make fetch happen. So listeners, if you want to help us make fetch happen, you should be giving. Isn't that right, Erin? See that segue?
Yep, I love it. That was a good one.
So fetch. I want to chat a little bit about giving because we started a new fiscal year. We did our first episode of the YOFcast to close out 2025, and that was really fun. The whole purpose of that episode was to tease you, which I realized looking back was kind of cruel. Like these are all the awesome things we could talk about if we were at 100% funding and we were in this end of year push with our first fiscal year of trying to get donations to come in the end of the year and for those that don't know, if you're new to the show or if this is your first episode, maybe you were like, oh my gosh, I love Mark Yarhouse and Julia Sadusky. Who's this Your Other Family group with the little bird in the logo? What's that about? Welcome to you as well. But we're a brand new nonprofit, even though Your Other Brothers, the men's community, has existed for over a decade now. And our goal, my goal, Erin's goal, is to be 100% doing this full time. For me to lead the whole ministry, to also lead the men's ministry, for Erin to lead the women's ministry. That's the dream of not only putting together more blogs and more podcasts, but community events, Zoom calls and retreats. And we have a Discord server for discussions and maybe like in-person things, meetups and groups and things too. So like there's so much possibility. There's so much exciting potential. But the reality is we're not there yet. We're not at 100%. And, and Erin, you said it really well, I think, on our last episode, that we do not get to pick the timeline. Like this is the timeline where we're at. We're being diligent. I believe we're being diligent. We have an awesome board. They're certainly being diligent. Like, oh my gosh, shout out to our board. And so I feel pretty confident that we're doing everything we can with what we've been given. And truly the rest is up to the Lord, and it's up to anyone listening, anyone reading, anyone clicking, anyone out there who appreciates what we're doing. And we're trying to eclipse this 4-phase mountain range. We're in the middle of mountain range number 2, or mountain number 2, of trying to get me to full-time, getting Erin fully covered at part-time, and then moving to part 3 where we can get Erin to full-time status ideally. And then phase 4, we would love to hire more people, like grow the family and have more people doing more things, and the goal of just putting out more content and doing more community opportunities as well. So we're in the middle of all of that, and it's not certain when things will happen. Going back to this podcast though, I was like, as I had the holidays to ruminate on it and to think about where we were with the funding, because we weren't sure what would come in and what wouldn't come in when 2025 ended. What I think makes sense is to still do this show, to not basically put this show on an indefinite hiatus where we did episode 1 in 2025. And like, God only knows, like, what if it's 5 years before we get to the mark where we're at quote unquote 100%? Like, are we really going to do episode 2 in like 2030? Like, that feels weird to me. I was like, I don't know about that. So let's at least do this every quarter. Like, my hope is to do this podcast at least every 3 months, maybe sooner than that, who knows, but at least every 3 months to have like some sort of a baseline. And it would be awesome if like Your Other Sisters was able to do something on a similar basis, Your Other Brothers, like maybe slightly less Your Other Brothers podcasts, but more of these types of podcasts and more other Your Other Brothers, gets a little tongue twistery there, other Your Other Brothers content and community options too. So we're playing around with the rhythms this year because we've set a new budget, and a newsletter has either just come out or is about to come out whenever this episode comes out. I think it's just come out, if I'm looking into my crystal ball and looking at the future. So you can check the newsletter for kind of a more financial update. But essentially, like, Erin and I we're not working as much today as we were a month ago or 2 months ago. And that's just out of the board's wisdom and prudence of like, these are the dollars coming in, and how can we fairly compensate Tom and Erin to do the work that they're passionate about doing. And so we're scaling back our efforts, at least right now. That might change a month from now or 2 months from now or 6 months from now, but we're just kind of keeping that in mind. And what's on my mind, I'll say this to close out, and then I'll go to you, Erin, if you have any thoughts. But my goal is just like, okay, if I'm working less hours today than I was a month ago, how can I maximize those the most? Like, what's the most strategic way to use that? Whether it's with fundraising, support raising, Zoom meetings and coffee dates, or working on a blog, working on a podcast, working on social media, which is kind of something I've just neglected, to be honest, with all the other duties. We have an awesome community. Speaking to Your Other Brothers, like, we have over 100 men in this Your Other Brothers community, many of whom are pretty awesome men. Like, Erin, you've met quite a number of them. I've had this realization over the last few months. Do I need to lead every single Zoom call? Like, literally every single Zoom call that's for topical discussions in our community? And I think what I've come to realize, which is now an obvious realization, is that no, I don't. There are so many other guys in our community who are awesome leaders, and they can lead a Zoom call discussion about this or about that. And so that's going to be like one creative way moving forward, that I'm going to work less, quote unquote, is by empowering other members of our community to lead and volunteer as they're generously willing to do. So, I think there's room for some creativity and working less to work more strategically. So I kind of appreciate the scaling back for this season to just ponder that, like, where am I being most effective? And the goal being, how can we get to 100%? How can we just reach more people? Because that's ultimately what it's all about. Like, yeah, I would love to be back at full time again. And for 6 months I was, so it was love that experience for the first time in a decade to have a full-time salary with this organization that I love so much. Was and is awesome. So not only how can I get back to that, and I know Erin wants to get to that too, but like the whole goal of it being, how can we reach people, whether they're young people, older people, everywhere in between people? Like, how can we just reach more people? And that's the goal. So if you're not giving, check out our links in bio. Check out our links in the show notes and shoot me an email, tom@yourotherfamily.org, or Erin an email, Erin@yourotherfamily.org. And we would love to chat with you, whether you're a straight person, whether you're a gay person, whether you're any of those terms that were mentioned on this episode or anywhere in between. We would love to hear from you.
Would love. I also wanted to plug a blog that came out this month.
Please.
From Ashley, called The Sisters Who Happen to Be Witches. Scary title, but it's a great blog, very vulnerable. I would just encourage everyone to read it. Really excited for some more blog content from Your Other Sisters to come out this year. Excited for other opportunities to record podcasts, like Tom was saying. Just trying to figure out how to use my time most wisely. But every time I do something like this, I'm reminded of the ultimate goal is to do this work full time. Every time I interview someone or conclude a podcast or publish something, I'm reminded that this is what I've been wanting for going on 4 years now. We are.
Erin, if I don't affirm you enough, you've been a trooper to just be patient and go with whatever the pace is, and for to your credit, to also step up and contribute in really awesome ways too, in this organizational effort. So I don't know. Yeah, it's just this balance of trusting the Lord's timing, but then I love our dear president, our dear chair of the board, who, I'm paraphrasing how he describes it, but it's like the Lord is like not in a rush. Like, essentially the Lord is on his timeline. He is not in a rush, which is frustrating from an earthly perspective because we're only getting older. I'm becoming more of an aging millennial than you are, Erin. You're a little bit behind me, but yeah, I feel the weathering of the waiting. But again, the goal is to be a good steward of what we've got with what we've got. And so if you're interested in membership, first of all, yourotherbrothers.org/membership. If you are a brother, if you are a sister, yourothersisters.org/membership. Shoot a quick little inquiry form. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll be in touch, Erin and I. Versus also, if you just love what we're doing, if you're listening to this episode and you want to give, head over to our giving page, which is accessible on our website, yourotherfamily.org, yourotherbrothers.org, yourothersisters.org. It's all the same. And we'd love to be in touch. We're eager to receive more monthly giving in particular, but if you have a one-time gift to give, we will gladly take it. And we're so grateful for everything that's come in. Like the end of year push, it was really fun to get all these names that I was really familiar with. And then some names I had no idea, like, where did that person come from? And this person gave a gift. So it was a really fun time, November and December, as we had this end of year push for giving. And now that we're at the start of a new year, the journey continues. We have a new budget. We have a new, like I said, me and Erin have new hours that we're working with. And we're hoping that, I don't know, when November, December rolls around this year, like hopefully the landscape's a little or even a lot different. That would be really cool to see. And if you're not already subscribed to our newsletter, you can subscribe to our newsletter too. All the links are in the show notes. You can also go to our website, yourotherfamily.org, and subscribe to the Sparrow Quarterly. Don't you love it?
I love it.
My initial name for our newsletter was going to be the Quarterly Sparrow, but there was something about it that was not correct. The Sparrow Quarterly to me sounds unnecessarily pretentious, and I love it.
Sparrow Quarterly. It sounds British.
It does.
Cool.
Shout out to our British
Shout
contingent.
out to our British.
We love you all.
Yes. Tip tap to you.
All right, Erin. Well, again, I hope we do this again in the next 3 months, 3 months or less, and it'll be fun to see, my goodness, who we talk to or what we talk about. I'm excited. This conversation with the doctors Yarhouse and Sadusky, what an awesome one. For this to be our second episode, sky's the limit.
Yeah, I'm excited for what we do next.
All right, y'all. For all of my other brothers and sisters, my name's Tom.
And my name's Erin.
And in case you somehow forgot, you are not alone. Even the sparrow finds a home. Bye, fam.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Your Other Family podcast, a production of Your Other Family. If you enjoy this or any of the shows on Your Other Family Podcast Network, consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow our family of socials on Facebook and Instagram at Your Other Fam, Your Other Bros, and Your Other Sisters, and on YouTube at Your Other Fam. Finally, if you enjoy our content, consider giving to support our nonprofit ministry. Check out our YOF giving link in the episode description for membership in our YOB and YOS communities. Submit an inquiry at yourotherbrothers.org/membership or yourothersisters.org/membership. There's always room for one more sparrow in our nest. Until we journey next time, we're glad you're with us.
Your Other Family.